Jessica Williams had been working as a flight attendant for 8 years, and she thought she had seen everything. Rich passengers who demanded impossible things, crying babies on red-eye flights, and people who were afraid of flying. But nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen on Flight 447 from New York to London. It was a Tuesday morning, and the autumn sun was just starting to peek through the airport windows. Jessica walked through the terminal with her small suitcase rolling behind her, her navy blue uniform crisp and professional. She always arrived early for international flights. It gave her time to review the passenger list and prepare for any special requests. The Boeing 777 was beautiful, one of the newer planes in the fleet. Jessica loved working the first-class cabin on these long flights. The passengers were usually polite, and the tips were good. She needed every penny she could save. Life as a single woman in New York wasn't cheap, especially when you were still paying off debts from 3 years ago. As she stepped onto the plane, Jessica greeted Captain Rodriguez and the rest of the crew. Kate, her favorite colleague, was already setting up the galley. They had worked together for 2 years and had become good friends. "Morning, Jess," Kate called out with a smile. "We've got a full house today. 12 first-class passengers, and most of them are business travelers." Jessica nodded and picked up the passenger manifest. She always liked to know who she would be serving. It helped her provide better service when she could remember names and preferences. Her eyes scanned down the list. Mrs. Peterson in 1A, Mr. and Mrs. Grant in 2C and 2D, and then she saw it. Seat 3A, Thomas Parker. She stared at the name for a moment. Something about it felt familiar, but she couldn't place it. According to the notes, he was a tech entrepreneur, flying to London for business meetings. The system showed he had requested vegetarian meals and preferred still water over sparkling. Jessica tucked the manifest into her pocket and began her pre-flight routine. She checked that all the safety equipment was in place, made sure the cabin was clean, and prepared the welcome drinks. The first-class passengers would start boarding in 30 minutes. As she arranged the champagne glasses, Jessica's mind wandered to her life 3 years ago. She had been married then, living in a small apartment in Queens with her husband Alex. He had been working as a software engineer, and they were saving money to buy their first house. They had been so happy, making plans for their future together. Then came that terrible night in March. Alex had been driving home from work during a heavy rainstorm. The police said he lost control of the car on a bridge and crashed through the barrier into the river below. They searched for days, but his body was never found. The current was too strong, they said. Jessica had to have a funeral with an empty casket. She shook her head, pushing away the sad memories. 3 years had passed, and she was finally starting to heal. The grief counselor had told her that moving forward didn't mean forgetting Alex. It just meant learning to live with the loss. The boarding announcement echoed through the cabin, and Jessica positioned herself near the entrance to welcome the first-class passengers. She put on her professional smile, the one she had practiced thousands of times. The first few passengers boarded normally. Mrs. Peterson was an elderly lady traveling to visit her grandchildren. The Grants were celebrating their wedding anniversary with a trip to Europe. Jessica welcomed each of them warmly, helping them settle into their seats. Then he walked on board. Jessica looked up from the manifest in her hand, ready to greet the next passenger with her usual cheerful welcome. But the words died in her throat. Her clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. The man standing in front of her was Alex, her husband, her dead husband. He had the same dark hair, though it was shorter now and styled differently. The same brown eyes that used to look at her with so much love. The same smile that had made her fall in love with him 7 years ago. Even his walk was the same, that confident stride she remembered so well. But that was impossible. Alex was dead. She had identified his car when they pulled it from the river. She had planned his funeral. She had grieved for him for 3 years. "Excuse me, are you all right?" the man asked, his voice filled with concern. It was Alex's voice, but there was something different about his accent, a slight change she couldn't identify. Jessica bent down quickly to pick up her clipboard, trying to hide her shaking hands. When she stood up, she forced herself to look at him again. Maybe she was mistaken. Maybe grief was playing tricks on her mind. But no. This was definitely Alex's face. Every feature was exactly the same. The small scar on his chin from when he fell off his bike as a child. The way his left eyebrow was slightly higher than his right. The tiny mole near his ear. "I'm sorry," Jessica managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Welcome aboard. You must be." She looked down at the manifest, even though she already knew the answer. "Mr. Thomas Parker?" The man smiled, and Jessica's heart nearly stopped. It was Alex's smile, warm and genuine. "That's right. Seat 3A, I believe." Jessica nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She led him to his seat, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. As he settled into the window seat, she noticed more details that were unmistakably Alex. The way he adjusted his watch, always sliding it exactly 1 inch up his wrist. The way he folded his jacket, pressing down each crease carefully. But there were differences too. He seemed more muscular than Alex had been. His skin was slightly tanned as if he had been somewhere sunny. And there was a small scar above his left eyebrow that she didn't remember. "Could I have some water, please?" Thomas asked politely. "Still water if you have it." Jessica nodded and hurried away, desperate to escape his presence. In the galley, she gripped the counter, trying to steady herself. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Kate noticed her distress immediately. "Jess, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jessica almost laughed at the accuracy of that statement. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just feeling a bit tired, I guess." But she wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. She poured a glass of still water, her hands trembling so badly that some spilled onto the counter. As she walked back to seat 3A, she studied Thomas Parker more carefully. He was reading a business magazine, and she noticed his wedding ring finger. There was a pale band of skin where a ring had been, as if he had recently stopped wearing one. Alex had worn a simple gold band, just like the mark she could see. When she placed the water on his tray table, their hands brushed for just a moment. Jessica felt an electric shock run through her body. She knew that touch. She had held that hand 1,000 times. Thomas looked up at her with a puzzled expression. "Have we met before? You seem familiar?" Jessica's breath caught in her throat. For a moment she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition? Confusion? But then it was gone, replaced by polite curiosity. "No," Jessica whispered. "I don't think so." As she walked away, Jessica's mind raced with impossible questions. How could Alex be alive? Why was he calling himself Thomas Parker? And most importantly, why didn't he seem to recognize her at all? Jessica couldn't concentrate on anything. Every time she tried to serve other passengers, her eyes kept drifting back to seat 3A. Thomas Parker was calmly working on his laptop, occasionally sipping his water or glancing out the window. He looked so relaxed, so normal. But Jessica's world was spinning out of control. During the safety demonstration, she found herself stumbling over words she had said hundreds of times before. Kate gave her a concerned look, but Jessica just smiled weakly and continued with the routine. Her mind kept racing with questions that had no logical answers. Once they reached cruising altitude, Jessica knew she had to do something. She couldn't just stand there and pretend nothing had happened. She needed answers, even if they drove her crazy. She waited until most passengers were settling in for the long flight. Some were sleeping, others were watching movies on their screens. Jessica grabbed her phone and headed to the small crew rest area at the back of the plane. Her hands were still shaking as she typed, "Thomas Parker, tech entrepreneur," into the search engine. The results shocked her. There were dozens of articles about Thomas Parker dating back 5 years, photos of him at business conferences, interviews in technology magazines, news stories about his successful companies. In every photo, he looked exactly like Alex, but the timeline was impossible. These articles showed him at events that happened while Alex was still alive and married to her. Jessica scrolled through more results, her heart pounding. There was a photo of Thomas Parker at a charity gala just 2 years ago, smiling next to other wealthy business people. Another showed him giving a presentation at a tech conference in California. But what disturbed her most was how comfortable he looked in these pictures, how natural his smile appeared. She found an interview from last year where Thomas talked about his work in artificial intelligence and clean energy. The interviewer asked about his personal life, and Thomas had said he preferred to keep that private. When pressed about whether he was married, he had simply said, "I'm focused on my work right now." Jessica felt sick. This man had been living a completely different life while she grieved for her dead husband. But how was that possible? She remembered the accident so clearly. The police had called her at work, telling her that Alex's car had been found in the East River. She had rushed to the scene, seen the broken barrier on the bridge, watched the divers searching the dark water. She needed to talk to someone. Jessica quickly dialed her sister Rachel's number, praying she would. "Answer, Jess? Aren't you supposed to be working?" Rachel's voice was concerned. "Rachel, I need you to do something for me, and please don't ask questions right now," Jessica whispered, glancing around to make sure no one could hear her. "Okay. What's wrong? You sound terrible." Jessica took a shaky breath. "I need you to look up everything you can find about a man named Thomas Parker. He's some kind of tech businessman. Send me whatever you find, especially photos." "Jessica, what's going on? Please, just do it. I'll explain later, I promise." After hanging up, Jessica realized she needed to get back to work. She had been gone too long already. She walked back through the cabin, trying to act normal, but her eyes immediately went to Thomas Parker again. He was on a phone call, speaking quietly. Jessica pretended to check on nearby passengers while straining to listen. He was speaking what sounded like perfect Mandarin Chinese. Jessica's blood ran cold. Alex had been half Chinese through his father's side, but he had never spoken the language. His father had died when Alex was young, and his mother had raised him speaking only English. As Thomas ended his call, Jessica noticed something else that made her heart skip. He rolled his shoulders and stretched his neck in a very specific way that Alex always did when he was tired. It was such a personal gesture, something no one else would notice or copy. She had to get closer. Jessica approached his seat with a practiced smile. "Would you like anything else to drink, Mr. Parker? Perhaps some coffee?" Thomas looked up at her, and for just a moment, Jessica saw something flicker in his eyes. A brief look of confusion, as if he was trying to remember something important. "Coffee would be nice, thank you," he said slowly. "Make it black. No sugar." Jessica's heart stopped. That was exactly how Alex drank his coffee. She had made it for him every morning for 4 years of marriage. As she prepared his coffee, her phone buzzed with messages from Rachel. Jessica quickly looked at the photos her sister had sent. They were all of Thomas Parker at various business events, but one made her gasp out loud. It was a photo from 3 years ago, taken at a tech conference in San Francisco. The timestamp showed it was taken just 1 week after Alex's supposed death. Jessica stared at the photo until her eyes burned. It was definitely the same face, the same person now sitting 20 feet away from her. But how could Alex have been in California a week after his funeral? She brought Thomas his coffee, her hands trembling slightly. As she placed it on his tray table, she noticed a small birthmark on his wrist that was identical to one Alex had. It was shaped like a tiny crescent moon, something she used to trace with her finger when they watched TV together. "Thank you," Thomas said, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. As he did, Jessica saw something that nearly made her drop her serving tray. On his shoulder, just visible under his shirt collar, was the edge of a tattoo. She could only see a small part of it, but she recognized the design immediately. It was a compass rose, the same tattoo Alex had gotten on their 2nd anniversary. Jessica excused herself quickly and rushed back to the galley. Kate was preparing meals for the main cabin service. "Jess, you really don't look well. Maybe you should rest for a bit," Kate suggested. But Jessica couldn't rest. She needed more proof, more answers. She found herself making excuses to walk past Thomas's seat throughout the flight. Each time, she noticed more details that belonged to Alex. The way he held his pen when writing, the fact that he was left-handed, the way he always kept his phone face down on the table. During one pass, she overheard him talking to another passenger about his work. Thomas mentioned that he specialized in software development and artificial intelligence, exactly the fields Alex had worked in. But when the other passenger asked where he had studied, Thomas mentioned universities that Alex had never attended. Hours passed, and Jessica felt like she was losing her mind. Every piece of evidence pointed to this being Alex, but the logical part of her brain insisted it was impossible. Dead people didn't just show up 3 years later with new names and successful businesses. As they began their descent toward London, Jessica made a decision that terrified her. She had to confront him directly. She couldn't spend the rest of her life wondering and going crazy with questions that had no answers. She waited until most passengers were busy preparing for landing. Thomas was putting away his laptop and organizing his belongings. Jessica approached his seat one final time, her heart pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. "Mr. Parker," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't think I'm crazy." Thomas looked up at her with those familiar brown eyes, and Jessica saw her entire future hanging in the balance of what would happen next. Jessica spent the next hour trying to act normal, but her mind was racing. Every time she walked past Thomas Parker's seat, her heart pounded harder. She needed to know the truth, but she also needed to keep doing her job. The other passengers were starting to notice that something was wrong with her. "Could you bring me some peanuts?" asked Mrs. Peterson from seat 1A, but Jessica was so distracted she almost walked right past her. "Of course, I'm sorry," Jessica said quickly, forcing a smile, but her hands were shaking as she opened the small bag of nuts. Kate noticed Jessica's strange behavior during the meal service. "Are you feeling sick?" she whispered when they were both in the galley. "You look pale and you keep staring at that passenger in 3A. Jessica wanted to tell Kate everything, but how could she explain that her dead husband was sitting 20 feet away, alive and breathing, calling himself by a different name? Kate would think she had lost her mind. "I'm fine, just tired," Jessica lied. It's been a long week, but she wasn't fine. She needed answers, and she needed them now. During her break, Jessica grabbed her phone and went to the small bathroom at the back of the plane. With trembling fingers, she opened her camera app and switched it to silent mode. She knew what she was about to do was risky, but she had to have proof. Jessica walked slowly back through the cabin, pretending to check on passengers. When she reached Thomas Parker's row, she saw that he was asleep, his head resting against the window. This was her chance. Moving as quietly as possible, Jessica raised her phone and took several photos of his sleeping face. The resemblance to Alex was so perfect it made her feel dizzy. Every feature was exactly the same: the shape of his nose, the way his eyelashes curved, even the small freckle near his left ear that Alex had since childhood. Back in the bathroom, Jessica immediately sent the clearest photo to her sister Rachel with a message. "Call me right now. Emergency." Her phone rang within 2 minutes. "Jessica, what is going on?" Rachel's voice was sharp with worry. "Who is this man? He looks exactly like Alex," Jessica finished, her voice barely a whisper. "Rachel, that's what I'm trying to figure out. This man is on my flight right now, calling himself Thomas Parker, and he looks exactly like my dead husband." There was silence on the other end of the line for several seconds. Then Rachel spoke, her voice careful and concerned. "Jess, honey, are you sure you're okay? I mean, grief can sometimes make us see things. I'm not imagining this." Jessica hissed, trying to keep her voice down. "I know what Alex looked like. I was married to him for 4 years. This is either him, or it's someone who looks exactly like him." Okay, Rachel said quickly. "What do you need me to do?" "Find out everything you can about Thomas Parker. Look up his background, his business, where he came from. And Rachel, look for anything that connects him to Alex or to the accident 3 years ago." "I'll start searching right now," Rachel promised. "But Jess, please be careful. If this man isn't who he says he is, there might be a reason for that. After hanging up, Jessica knew she couldn't wait for Rachel's research. She needed to investigate this herself. She found a quiet corner in the crew area and started searching on her phone. Thomas Parker had an impressive online presence. His company, Parker Technologies, was worth millions of dollars. There were articles about his work in artificial intelligence and clean energy dating back several years. But the more Jessica read, the more confused she became. According to his official biography, Thomas Parker had grown up in California and studied at Stanford University. But Alex had grown up in New York and went to a local college. The timeline didn't make sense either. Some of these articles about Thomas Parker were from when Alex was still alive. Then Jessica found something that made her stomach drop. It was a news article from 4 years ago about a tech conference in Hong Kong. There was a photo of several businessmen, and one of them was labeled as Thomas Parker. But the man in the photo was definitely not the person sitting on her plane. This Thomas Parker was older, with gray hair and glasses. Jessica's hands were shaking as she continued searching. She found an obituary from 3 years ago for the original Thomas Parker. He had died in a car accident in Hong Kong just 2 months after Alex's accident in New York. The pieces of a horrible puzzle were starting to come together in Jessica's mind, but she didn't want to believe what she was thinking. She walked back to the cabin, and this time she paid closer attention to everything about the man in seat 3A. He was awake now, working on his laptop. Jessica approached with a coffee pot, pretending to offer refills. "More coffee, Mr. Parker?" "Please," he said, looking up at her. When their eyes met, Jessica saw something that made her heart skip. For just a moment, there was a flash of recognition in his eyes, quickly replaced by confusion. As Jessica poured his coffee, she noticed his hands. They were the same hands she had held countless times, the same long fingers, the same small scar on his thumb from when he had cut himself fixing their kitchen cabinet. But he was wearing an expensive watch she had never seen before, and his nails were perfectly manicured. "Have you been to London before, Mr. Parker?" Jessica asked, trying to sound casual. "Many times," he replied. "I have business there regularly." His voice was Alex's voice, but there was something different about his accent. It was subtle, but Jessica had spent 4 years listening to Alex talk every day. This man spoke like someone who had learned English as a second language, even though it was perfect. As she walked away, Jessica overheard him taking a phone call. He was speaking in what sounded like Mandarin Chinese, and he was fluent. Alex's father had been Chinese, but Alex had never learned the language. His father died when Alex was very young, and his American mother had raised him speaking only English. But this man, this Thomas Parker, who looked exactly like her husband, was having a complex business conversation in perfect Chinese. Jessica felt like the world was spinning around her. Nothing made sense. If this was Alex, how was he alive? How did he become a millionaire tech entrepreneur? Why was he speaking Chinese? And most importantly, why didn't he seem to recognize her? Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Found something strange. Calling you in 5 minutes." Jessica couldn't wait any longer. The plane would be landing in London in less than 2 hours, and this might be her only chance to get answers. Her hands were trembling as she made her decision. She had to confront him directly, no matter how crazy it might sound. She waited until most of the passengers were either sleeping or busy with their entertainment systems. Kate was in the back galley preparing for the final meal service. This was the perfect time. Jessica approached seat 3A with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. Thomas Parker was typing on his laptop, completely focused on his work. He looked so peaceful, so normal. But Jessica's world had been turned upside down and she needed answers. "Excuse me, Mr. Parker," she said quietly, her voice barely steady. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Thomas looked up, surprised by the serious tone in her voice. "Is everything all right? Is there a problem with the flight?" "No, the flight is fine," Jessica said, glancing around to make sure no other passengers were listening. "It's something else, something personal. Could you come with me to the galley area? I promise it will only take a few minutes. Thomas seemed puzzled but nodded. He closed his laptop and followed Jessica to the small space between the first class cabin and the galley. It was the most private area on the plane, though Jessica knew Kate might return at any moment. Once they were alone, Jessica turned to face him. Up close, the resemblance to Alex was even more overwhelming. Every detail of his face was exactly the same. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she scrolled to find the photo she needed. "Mr. Parker," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to show you something, and I need you to please not think I'm crazy." She held up her phone, showing him a photo from her wedding day 4 years ago. In the picture, Jessica was wearing a white dress and smiling radiantly next to a man in a dark suit. The man in the photo looked exactly like Thomas Parker. Thomas stared at the photo, his face going pale. He looked from the phone to Jessica and back to the photo again, his mouth slightly open in shock. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "Who is this man? Why does he look like you?" Jessica finished. "His name was Alex Chen. He was my husband." Her voice broke slightly on the word, husband. "He died in a car accident 3 years ago. Or at least I thought he died." Thomas continued staring at the photo, his hands now visibly shaking. "This is impossible," he whispered. "I don't know this woman. I don't remember this wedding. I would remember getting married." Jessica showed him another photo, this one of Alex sitting on their couch with their cat, Whiskers. Then another of Alex cooking in their small kitchen, wearing the silly apron Jessica had bought him that said, "Kiss the cook." With each photo, Thomas became more agitated. He kept shaking his head, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that was so familiar to Jessica it made her heart ache. "I don't understand what's happening," Thomas said, his voice rising slightly. "These photos, this man, he looks exactly like me, but I've never seen these places before. I don't know who you are." Jessica took a deep breath and made the most difficult decision of her life. "Your name isn't Thomas Parker," she said quietly. "You're Alex Chen, and you're my husband." The words hung in the air between them like a bomb that had just exploded. Thomas stared at her with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been fear. "That's impossible," he said, backing away slightly. "I know who I am. I'm Thomas Parker. I run Parker Technologies. I live in London. I have a whole life, a whole business." "Then explain this," Jessica said, pulling up her sleeve to show him a small scar on her arm. "You gave me this scar during our 2nd year of marriage. We were moving furniture and you accidentally knocked me into the corner of a table. You felt so guilty that you took me to the emergency room even though it wasn't serious." Thomas looked at the scar, and Jessica saw something flicker in his eyes. A brief moment of recognition, quickly replaced by confusion. "I don't remember that," he said, but his voice was less certain now. Jessica showed him more photos. Their apartment in Queens, their favorite restaurant, the beach where they had their honeymoon. With each image, she watched Thomas's face carefully, looking for any sign that he remembered. "This tattoo," Jessica said, pointing to a photo where Alex's shoulder was visible. "You have the same one. I can see part of it under your shirt right now." Without thinking, Thomas touched his shoulder, right where the tattoo would be. The gesture was automatic, as if his body remembered even when his mind didn't. "You always do that," Jessica whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Whenever you're nervous or confused, you touch your shoulder right there. You've done it 3 times since we started talking." Thomas looked down at his hand still resting on his shoulder, as if he had never noticed the gesture before. "I need to sit down," he said weakly. Jessica guided him to one of the crew seats in the galley area. She sat across from him, close enough to touch but afraid to reach out. 3 years ago," Jessica began, "you were driving home from work during a storm. The police said your car went off the bridge into the East River. They never found your body. I had to have a funeral with an empty casket." As she spoke, Thomas was holding his head in his hands, I don't remember any accident, he said. But I do remember waking up in a hospital. It was 3 years ago. I was in Hong Kong and I couldn't remember anything. Nothing about my past, my family, where I came from. Jessica's heart stopped. You had amnesia? Complete memory loss, Thomas confirmed. The doctors said I had suffered severe head trauma. They found me unconscious with no identification. I spent months in rehabilitation, trying to remember who I was, but nothing came back. Then how did you become Thomas Parker? Thomas looked up at her, and Jessica could see the confusion and pain in his eyes. There was a man in the hospital who had died in a car accident around the same time I was brought in. His name was Thomas Parker. Somehow the hospital records got mixed up. When I was released and still couldn't remember anything, I accepted that identity. His business partner helped me, said I was his friend who had been in an accident. Jessica felt the world spinning around her. So you've been living as someone else for 3 years? I didn't know I was living as someone else, Thomas said desperately. I thought I was Thomas Parker. I thought that was my life, my business, my identity. They sat in silence for a moment, both trying to process what this meant. But some things feel familiar, Thomas said quietly. When you showed me that photo of the kitchen, and I know I've never been in that room before, but something about it felt right, like home. Jessica's tears were flowing freely now. It was our home, Alex. We lived there for 3 years. Alex? Thomas repeated the name slowly, as if testing how it felt in his mouth. Sometimes I have dreams about someone calling that name. I always wondered what it meant. Do you remember anything else, anything at all? Thomas closed his eyes, concentrating hard. There's a song, he said softly. Sometimes I wake up with this song in my head, but I don't know where I heard it. It's an old jazz song, something about moonlight. Jessica gasped. Moonlight in Vermont. It was our wedding song. You used to hum it while you cooked breakfast on Sunday mornings. Thomas opened his eyes and looked at Jessica with an expression she hadn't seen in 3 years. It was the way Alex used to look at her when he was trying to solve a difficult problem at work. What was I like? He asked quietly. As Alex, I mean. What was our life like? And for the first time in 3 years, Jessica began to tell the story of their love as Jessica began telling Thomas about their life together. Something extraordinary started to happen. The more she talked, the more his eyes seemed to focus, as if pieces of a broken puzzle were slowly fitting back together in his mind. We lived in a small apartment in Queens, Jessica said softly. It had yellow walls in the kitchen because you said it made the mornings feel more cheerful. We had this old coffee maker that made terrible noises, but you refused to replace it because it was the first thing we bought together. Thomas closed his eyes, concentrating hard. Yellow walls, he repeated quietly. I can almost see them. And there was a window above the sink that looked out at a fire escape, Jessica finished. You used to sit there sometimes when you were thinking about work problems. Work, Thomas said, opening his eyes suddenly. Jessica, I need to tell you something about the night of the accident. Some things are starting to come back to me, and I think someone wanted me dead. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? Thomas looked around nervously, making sure they were still alone. That night, 3 years ago, I remember driving in the rain. But it wasn't just a random drive home from work. I was going to meet someone, a lawyer. A lawyer? Why? I had discovered something, Thomas said, his voice getting stronger as more memories returned. My business partner, David Morrison, was involved in something illegal. Money laundering, I think. I had found evidence on the company computers and I was scared. I was going to turn him in. Jessica grabbed his hand without thinking. It felt exactly like Alex's hand, warm and familiar. You never told me any of this. I didn't want to worry you until I was sure, Thomas said. But now I remember making that appointment with a lawyer. I was supposed to meet him that night, but I never made it because of the accident. You think David caused the accident? Thomas was quiet for a moment, and Jessica could see him struggling with fragments of memory. I remember headlights in my rearview mirror. Someone was following me too closely. Then there was an impact from behind, and my car went through the barrier. Jessica felt sick. Someone pushed you off the bridge? I think so. But here's what's really strange. David Morrison died in a car accident in Hong Kong just 2 months after my accident. The same David Morrison whose identity somehow got mixed up with mine in the hospital. The pieces were starting to fit together in a terrifying way. So when you woke up in the Hong Kong hospital, they thought you were David Morrison? Not exactly. There was another man, also named David Morrison, who died in Hong Kong. But he was David Morrison Sr., a businessman who had been helping investigate the money laundering. His son, my business partner, David Morrison Jr., was the criminal. Jessica's head was spinning. I don't understand. Thomas took a deep breath. I think the people who tried to kill me found me after the accident. Maybe I survived and was unconscious somewhere before they moved me to Hong Kong. When I had amnesia, they decided it was easier to keep me alive, but with a new identity, far away from anyone who might recognize me. But why? Why not just kill you? Because dead bodies raise questions. A missing person who's presumed dead in a river doesn't. And if I ever did remember anything, I'd be thousands of miles away with a completely different identity. Jessica realized the horrible truth. They made you disappear without actually killing you. Exactly. And the business I thought I built as Thomas Parker? I'm starting to remember that a lot of those deals and connections existed before my accident. I think they gave me someone else's life and business just with my face. As they talked, more memories were flooding back to Alex. He remembered their cat, Whiskers, who used to sleep on his laptop keyboard while he worked from home. He remembered their plan to start a family. He remembered how Jessica always burned the pancakes on Sunday mornings, but he never complained because she looked so proud of herself. But he also remembered darker things. The threatening phone calls he had received before the accident, the strange cars parked outside their apartment, the feeling that someone was watching him. Jessica, he said urgently, if my memories are coming back, that means I might remember, enough to be dangerous to them again. And if they find out I'm alive and that I remember, they'll try to kill you again. Jessica finished. Not just me. You too, now that you know the truth. Jessica felt fear creeping up her spine. What do we do? Thomas looked out the airplane window. London was getting closer and they would be landing soon. We have to be smart about this. These people have kept me under their control for 3 years without me even knowing it. They probably have people watching Thomas Parker's activities. So, what are you saying? I'm saying that when this plane lands, Thomas Parker has to continue being Thomas Parker, and you have to be just the flight attendant who served him coffee. Jessica stared at him in disbelief. You want us to pretend this conversation never happened? For now, yes. Until we can figure out who these people are and how to stop them safely. Alex, I can't lose you again. I spent 3 years thinking you were dead. I can't go back to that. You won't have to, he said, reaching out to touch her face gently. But we need time to plan this carefully. If we're not careful, we could both end up dead. Jessica leaned into his touch, remembering how safe she used to feel when Alex held her. How will I contact you? I'll find a way to reach out safely. Maybe through your sister. But Jessica, you can't tell anyone about this conversation, not even Kate. These people are dangerous and they're smart. As if summoned by her name, Kate appeared in the galley. Jess, we need to start preparing for landing, she called out. Thomas immediately dropped his hand and stepped back, his face returning to the polite mask of a passenger. Thank you for the excellent service, and he said loudly enough for Kate to hear. I'll be sure to mention it in my feedback. Jessica forced herself to smile professionally. You're very welcome, Mr. Parker. I hope you enjoyed your flight. But as Thomas returned to his seat, Jessica saw him pause and look back at her one more time. In that brief moment, she saw Alex looking at her with all the love and pain of their separation. Then he turned away, and Thomas Parker continued walking. Kate approached Jessica with a concerned look. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Jessica almost laughed at how accurate that statement was. I'm fine, just tired. As the plane began its descent into London, Jessica watched Thomas Parker calmly pack up his belongings and prepare for landing. To everyone else, he was just another wealthy businessman ending a routine flight. But Jessica knew the truth. Her husband was alive, he was in danger, and somehow, they had to find a way to build a new life together without getting killed in the process. The hardest part was not knowing when or if she would see him again.